To the university world, Socrates is a hero because he gave his life for what he believed. He died defending the unarmed truth. Moreover, he didn't worry very much about whether or not he was effective. It would be difficult to imagine him saying, as they handed him the hemlock, "Wait a minute, fellas, is Plato going to write this up?" Socrates knew that in this world, we ultimately have to do what's right, excuse me, according to our conscience, and only penultimately what's more effective. He broke Athenian law, but not lightly. And he did so in the name of a higher authority. Furthermore, he died full of goodwill. I love my city, but I will not stop preaching that which I believe is true. You may kill me, but I will obey God rather than you. In both Zechariah and the Gospel of Luke, we can see that the inherent tendency of civil disobedience within the stories of Jesus' glorious entry into Jerusalem. Jesus had long known that the Son of Man must suffer many things from the scribes and the Pharisees and be killed. Luke chapter 9. As it was in the first century, Jesus knew that even these days, the multitude might hail him as Son of God and Messiah, but by the week's end, they would desert him, abandoned also by his beloved disciples. His sole worldly possession, just one piece of rope. He too must have wondered about the effectiveness and the success of his mission. From the cross, we hear him cry out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Like Socrates, Jesus broke the law. The official charge was treason, but his intent was clearly to uphold a higher law, and he died and a heart full of love for those who thought only to heap scorns on his bowed head. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. How many heroes of today were at earlier point in their lives notorious lawbreakers? Moses was a wanted man, and David an outlaw. Isaiah and Jeremiah were both accused of conspiracy and treason. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego were known and only known for their divine disobedience. And the disciples, when they finally understood the gospel message, as Peter put it, we must obey God rather than man, and they broke laws with regularity in defending their faith in Jesus Christ. Add to these biblical names those of Henry David Thoreau, Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., and so many others that you could make a list as long as your arm. Since the beginning of history, a list of world's saints whose individual conscience, as opposed to the mass mind, best represent the universal conscience of entire humanity. We know that rarely can majority rule be equated with the rule of conscience. Think, in America alone, of long years during which the majority of our citizens once supported slavery. Think of the disenfranchisement of women and of child labor. We know that democracy is less based on the proven goodness of the people, but rather on the proven evil of dictators. So the law never represents pure justice, but only about as much justice as at any given people at any given time will sanction. In other words, the law reflects public opinions as much as it instructs public opinions. Therefore, if the law in our nation or in any other nation is to reflect more and reject less of humanity's highest notions of justice and virtue, it will serve to embody that someone has to constantly to provoke change and renewal. And we see this tendency throughout the Old Testament as God appointed prophets to challenge the status quo. The change new laws will serve to embody, and civil disobedience then, as practiced first by Jesus and Socrates and many others who broke religious and as well as civil law, Socrates and Gandhi, is not only as an expression of conscience, but a way to move society toward a greater measure of justice and mercy of God. As a quick reading of American history will show, the civil disobedience has also been a time-honored community occupation. Let me give you several examples. In the 17th century, Quakers broke the law in Virginia, in Pennsylvania, and in Massachusetts. Said the great Quaker May Dyer, as she was to her death in Boston in 1660, she said, "Truth is my authority, not some authority my truth." In the 18th centuries, the followers of Washington, Hamilton, and Jefferson and Adams were strictly speaking traitors until success crowned efforts, and they became great patriots. In the 19th centuries, abolitionists, both black and white, defied the Fugitive Slave Act in 1850. In the first half of the 20th centuries, suffragettes engaged in illegal demonstrations, as did the labor movement with its boycotts and sit-ins, most of which were illegal at the time. And in the second half of the 20th centuries, in response to continued segregation and to the war in Vietnam, the civil rights and anti-war movement engaged regularly in the act of civil disobedience. Finally, in the 21st century, many of our younger generation rose against the mass population in defending the purity and preserving the environment to free Mother Earth from careless abuse and her resources and consequent pollutions. Why rehearse all this religious and American history of individual and in community civil disobedience on Sunday? For two reasons. Living in today's world, the followers of Jesus Christ must be ready to suffer for what we truly believe in. And the second, as we remember the Passion Week that we celebrated last month, the Passion Week is indeed full of politics. We can see the religious event take place in a public square, in a public forum. Hence, every day is a good time for Christians to start considering whether or not they are ready for acting according to our conscience, even if it means sometimes a civil disobedience. In following the footsteps of Jesus, leaders of Christian churches are called upon to help establish justice and to provide for those in need. We are called to do all we can to keep our church, our Presbyterian Church in Norwood, a Christ-centered, but not any single individual-centered. Even that may be the pastor. Only Christ can be centered of our devotion and our service, which means when the truth is injured, to defend it and to put obedience to Christ before obedience to government officials or any interest group of certain kind. At the same time, we need to recognize that in the church, unity is based not on agreement in all the issues, but on mutual concerns and respect for one another. And that should be the base of our church and congregational unity. As a pastor of PCIN, I would like to encourage all of you to make our church a sanctuary. This sanctuary is God's house and our spiritual home. As a theologian likes to say, it is a human imperative in response to the divine indicative, making our church a spiritual and physical sanctuary would also tie us to the best in our American heritage, the Underground Railroad, those opposed to the slaughter of Native Americans, those protests in the Spanish-American War, those marched in Selma, who turned in their draft card to protest the war in Vietnam. Sanctuary would also bring those who are neglected and abandoned in our society truly home, home to our conscience, and home to God's mercy and justice. It behooves us, the Christians, to realize now what the German churches learned too late, some 80 years ago, with the rise of Nazi parties, that it is not enough to resist injustice with confession of faith alone. We must confess with sometimes resistance, sometimes with our devoted action and services in acting according to our own sanctified conscience. As we are called to do that, I am reminded of the words of St. Augustine. He said, I do not say to you, seek the way. The way itself has come to you. Arise now and walk. Walk in hope and walk with courage to reach out to those who need your service, your care, and your embrace of love. May God bless our weekly witness of the gospel and of God's mercy and justice throughout this week. Amen.